read.
Just now we got it.
I see.
Yes, now.
You know, I'm still
That's why I told you.
No, but I saw, or I hit the button. I thought that was enough. What I forgot is that I have to hit a second button that says, how do I want to record it?
I want to say something. May I?
Wait. Sheila had her hand up first, and then I'll come to you, Yisrael, okay?
Okay.
Sheila?
Okay,
please.
a comment about the recording, not what I wanted to say, but you need a 16-year-old sitting next to you. That's what you need.
Okay.
Okay, so I think this is the part that the same excerpt that I read. I felt he was talking about prayer in synagogues today and what's happened with synagogues and how prayer is conducted today, how services are conducted today. And I finished reading that and I felt like saying, hallelujah, because it's exactly what I feel. When I go for high holiday services to a synagogue, for example, the truth of the matter is I go to a synagogue where there is no choir, where there is nothing like that. There just is the service. Honestly, I go there primarily because it's 2 blocks from my house and it's very convenient and I don't have to worry about parking. But when I go to the larger synagogues, I feel that the prayer is stolen from me. It's all become a choir concert, or most of it has become a choir concert. So I don't have the keva because I don't recite it myself. And I don't have that open door spontaneity because I'm not cocooning. I'm not in the middle of it. I'm sitting and I'm listening to a concert. But I'm sure that when you were the main rabbi, if you had said anything about changing that, there would have been tremendous backlash.
There was, and I wasn't able to. So leave it at that. But there's no question. Heschel begins the article. It was a speech actually in the early 50s with a critique of contemporary synagogues. There is a difference between what we would call worship, which is public, and prayer, which is personal. We have to keep that in mind as well. We have to understand that the purpose of public prayer, of worship, may be to bring people together, to articulate ideals, etc. But within that, you want to create the space as well for personal prayer. And certainly at times of personal prayer, we will sometimes return to melodies and images that we have from those occasions of public worship. They again, it's this polarity. One feeds off of the other. Yisrael, who was a chazan once at our synagogue at Beth Tzedek.
Yes, hello. What I want to say about prayer, when you know that most of my life I'm in shul. In a shul service, if you want to keep up with the speed of the service, nobody can pray. Because it's a matter of a race to gobble as many pages as you can in a short time. There is no prayer in shul. That's one thing. It would be nice if we cut the number of pages or the number of prayers in the Siddur to the service. If we cut them by 75%, we could pray. Secondly, I find out that a lot of prayers are archaic. They are meaningless and sometimes even contrary to our belief. If we say Mi kamocha ba'elim Adonai, that means there are other gods. So it doesn't make sense. And
try to keep it to a shorter question though, Yisrael.
Okay, so this and a lot of things talk about you are the king and this. The only king I know now is in the pack of cards. So that's what I wanted to say, that all these arguments and speeches and this, they're useless because the basic is we lost it. There isn't prayer in shul.
So let me just say a few things. First of all, there is an old debate, goes back to the Middle Ages, between the addition of what are called piyutim, or additional songs, additional poems, or not. And there are rabbis who say you shouldn't do that. But one of them, I'll just give you an example. One of them is Unatana Tokef. So even when you want to take them out, some of them have meaning. A second issue has to do with how do we imagine God? Believe me, Maimonides did not imagine God.
I know.
As an old man or as a monarch. So part of it is to use the language and to infuse the language with your own meaning. In the last 40, 50 years, as feminists have begun to work on prayers, they're looking for ways to include more feminine imagery. Some people find that meaningful. Some people find that actually blocks them. The Reform movement for a long time had more prayers in English and had much shorter services, in keeping with what I'll call is the Western Protestant tradition. That didn't make prayer any easier for them. It's hard. Rabbi Gunter Plaut, Zichrono Livracha, said to me many years ago, he thinks synagogue prayer is not what people want anymore. He said people want to come and study.
Correct.
But I think people also want to pray. And one of the things that I've seen in Hadar and in other places is tremendous, powerful community singing, that people can leave synagogue crying because their emotions have been touched.
Okay.
There's something there. And sometimes it comes with the old words, with the old baggage. But the question is it just a matter of style? How do we open ourselves up? So that's Heschel's primary question, is how do we open ourselves up to this experience? I will tell you, one time I wanted to go to a synagogue, a tefillah, a prayer service in Yerushalayim. And our kids were younger and we were running late. And I was really angry and very frustrated. And we got there and they were still like at Ashrei at the beginning part of the service. And when they finished Shacharit, they took a break for Kiddush. It was 12 o'clock. We had to go to somebody's house for lunch. So I didn't even hear the Torah reading, let alone Musaf, because they go till 3 o'clock.
Yeah.
Okay? You have to come like you're ready to come to a picnic. And having said that, the prayer, the davening was so powerful. But you could imagine if we said, come from 9 to 3, we'll take a half-hour break for cake and coffee and then go on, that wouldn't work either. There are all these challenges. I think Heschel was trying to point to them. He wasn't offering a solution, but he was pointing to a problem and also pointing toward the way deep and authentic prayer should function. And there's no question in my mind that he is part of what led another generation to reinvigorate prayer. Jerry, it's your turn. Try to go quickly.
Oop. I would say, in response to Sheila's previous comment, contrary to what she said, I find that coming to the services with the cantors and the choir takes me out of the norm and brings me into the synagogue. And my response to it, to sing along with them, leads me to a completely different plane entirely. And I feel at that point, the little of religiosity that I have is there. It's at that moment that time stands still. I think once, Rabbi, you probably can't remember, I said, you know, we should make the shul like the sanctuary, like Las Vegas. You looked at me and said, what? I said, we should take the clock out. Then nobody will know what time it is. Time will stand still and we'll focus on what's happening right in front of us. So each of us, I think, finds a different meaning when we go to shul and which shul we go to. I've gone to many of them. And certainly the place for me that I've found the most at the times that I allow myself is at Bet Tzedek and the services that we have there.
I thank you. I want to keep us going because there's a lot more tonight. I don't want to have the whole session devoted to the question of prayer. But there are 3 hands up. If you're going to say something that other people have already said, don't. And please say something or ask something that will add to our conversation. Shirley?
Well, maybe this is saying the same thing, but when I listen to singing in shul, first of all, I commend Beth Tzedek for having many services because we're all different. So we go to what works for us. But to me, the singing elicits that feeling or whatever it is to connect to the ineffable. So it's not a distance of me listening to something as a concert and sitting back and evaluating and judging it. It's the music is entering me and causing an inner response.
So I thank you. And in fact, at the beginning of the Amidah, there's a small phrase that we say, Adonai, God, Sfatai Tiftach, you open my mouth, Ufi yagid tilatecha, and my mouth will then offer you praise. So it's almost like we're praying to be able to pray. Elliot Zinner.
Yes, Rabbi, I find that in recent conversations about prayer to be very discomforting. It seems to be focused on more of a psychotherapeutic process. So here's some comments about overstaging at large synagogues with the choirs and so forth. I understand this lady's comment about that sort of staging turns something on in her that's good. Yes, I have felt that same way, although over the years I've appreciated less staging. So my question is, what's happened to God in the process, Rabbi? Maybe it's not an old man with a beard, but to whom are we praying? Is there a listener? And I almost hate to ask that because I'm fearful of the answer. Is there a listener?
I believe there's a listener. I think that's the whole point of Heschel. And I will say someone like Buber, but even someone who's on the opposite side like Soloveitchik. Yes, there is a listener. And we are talking to God. But you are correct. We sometimes get so caught up in the staging We get caught up in the psychology of things. One of my friends said that when he goes to a Buddhist retreat, he's not told, this is what it's going to do with you or for you. It kind of speaks for itself. And I began to adopt that and bring that into the synagogue, saying the prayers have their own power and their own purpose. If we can allow them to speak to us, and then hopefully sometimes they'll open our hearts. But again, I want to emphasize for Heschel, prayer is this pull, this polarity between the regular and the spontaneous, between the keva and the kavanah. And it's also part of the polarity between being an act that is embarrassing because it's humbling, and at the same time it's audacious to say, I have a place, I have something to say to God, and what I say matters and makes a difference to God and to the world. So it's both embarrassing and audacious, it's regular and it's spontaneous. I want to go to Shabbat. Hopefully I'll share the screen properly this time. Let me just say that Heschel's writing on Shabbat has found an audience from the most liberal of Jews to the most traditional of Jews. And it was, in some ways, the impetus for a project that was called Reboot. And part of what Reboot did was say, everyone should have a day when you turn off your electronics. Heschel's book and thinking played a big role in Judith Shiowitz's book on reclaiming the Sabbath. And there's a lot of discussion about how do we reclaim the Sabbath. But let's go to what Heschel wrote, and we'll see that now I hope. Can you see it? It says excerpts from the Sabbath?
Yes.
Okay, then we're on the right page. So let me just say that this comes from, these excerpts come from the San Francisco Jewish Museum. But if you type in Heschel the Sabbath onto any search engine, you're going to find a lot of stuff. So let's go to take a look at what Heschel is saying. First of all, he says, time is really important. Judaism, he says, is a religion of time. It's not a religion of space. Other cultures build monuments. For Jews, what is the most sacred is not space, but time. Now, I want to say that he wrote this in 1951. Maybe it was published in 51, maybe he wrote it in 49 or 50, before the full power of what it meant to be in Israel was experienced. Just a reminder that there were no historic sacred sites that we defined as sacred that Jews could go to from 1948 till 1967. The tomb of the Machpelah in Hebron, Rachel's burial place, the Western Wall. None of those places were accessible. Since 67, there is more of a sense of space, of place. And Heschel himself wrote a book in response to the Six-Day War called Israel, an Echo of Eternity. So he may have modified some of the dichotomy that he develops here. But nonetheless, there is something very important about saying what is primary in Judaism is time. And he says the Sabbath is a realm of time where the goal is not to have, but to be, not to own, but to give, not to control, but to share, not to subdue, but to be in accord. Again, those polarities, remember? And he says life goes wrong when you think that things or space are the sole concern. 6 days a week, we have a mitzvah to work, and we wrestle with the world. We wring profit from the earth. No, look at the beautiful use of the language there, the alliteration. But on Shabbat, we do something else. We're not focused on the world. We're focused on the seat of eternity in the soul. 6 days a week, we seek to dominate the world. On the seventh day, we want to dominate, or we try to control ourselves. How are you supposed to honor Shabbat? Good meals, good clothing, pleasure. And pleasure here is both sexual pleasure and just relaxing pleasure. There is the idea that Shabbat is an acronym for 3 other Hebrew words: Shena, B'Shabbat, Ta'anug. Sleep on Shabbat is a pleasure. Take a nap. I used to say it's like having a country home wherever you are. He used the idea of a palace in time. That term became part of post-Heschel language. It is a kingdom for all. Doesn't depend on how much you own. It is not only a date, but it is an atmosphere. Ideally, it's not a time for personal anxiety or care, for something that would dampen the spirit of joy. You're not supposed to confess sins. You're not supposed to be asking for so much. It's a day for praise, not petition. Again, the P and the P, the alliteration. And in order to get there, you have to be overawed by the marvel of time. Now, remember, when Heschel is writing this, he's writing after Einstein's theory of relativity. He's after that idea time has become so significant in contemporary culture. And he's saying it's not just a matter of time and energy. There's something more to it. There's something about the marvel of time that allows us to understand that some things can depend even on a single moment. And it is to take time to sing. To sanctify time is to sing the vowels of language with God. I'm going to close this up and end the screen share and come back to us. Reactions to this? Thoughts? Elliot.
Yes, Rabbi, I'm thinking a lot about this, but ultimately, in relationship to time, the reality is that everything is temporary, no matter what. The painful thing is all relationships will end in time, either by fate or by choice. In the case of marriage, perhaps divorce. In the case of fate, whatever Hashem deems. So I think as people get older, they realize more and more how important time is. And perhaps the only power we really have is to make each moment count.
So I think you're correct. As I was in Chicago and Milwaukee last week with older relatives who are in their upper 80s, and each of them said to me, I'm thinking more and more about mortality. When I spend time with people who are in hospice, they are much more acutely aware of the limitations they have of time. And the question is, how do I make the best use of the time that I have? And I often say to them, your goal is not to do something. Goal is simply to be with others that matter to you. Gail? You have to unmute yourself.
Amen. I got it. Thank you. This whole, everything's a dichotomy, and it's about bringing everything together, time and space. And I had, I'll be very brief. I had an experience a number of years ago where I went to a retreat where most people, I found out when I was there, were Buddhist. And one day I arrived at breakfast and I was wearing a Heschel t-shirt, and Zoom, everybody ran to me and wanted to talk, and they were all Jewish, apparently, Jubus. And they had just finished reading The Sabbath by Heschel's Sabbath. And they were completely like wanted to know and wanted to talk. And it really struck me how education, how critical it is to talk about these issues with young people, and to have them, and these people, of course, were totally into, having Sabbath as a day of rest and turning things off, but they never connected it with their Judaism. And I think we really have a duty to help people, young people, to understand and to make these connections with what's happening today and with the environment, whatever it is, to Torah and to Heschel's teachings. And otherwise, I think we're going to lose Judaism, or Judaism as we know it, as we certainly know it, or most of us have experienced it. I think it's critical.
I think it is. Heschel often said that Judaism is the least known religion. Yeah. We all think we know it, right? Yeah. But then every so often, something opens up a new door. Yeah. And that's really important. Yisrael?
Look, I'm not arguing with Heschel. He was much cleverer than me, but all his philosophy, what we see here, is he talks as a shomer mitzvot to other shomer mitzvot, but he doesn't deal with a Jew that said, listen, Shabbat for me is to take my family to the beach and be together with my family on the beach. Or Shabbat for me is to go and watch soccer or baseball or whatever. It's not to sit in synagogue and pray. So with this, he doesn't deal. He doesn't talk to anyone who is not thinking like him.
So that's been a criticism that's been made of Heschel. I'm thinking of Eugene Borowitz, for example. But part of his use of the evocative language is to open up a new possibility for people to think and see in a different way. So the language is not just a matter of beauty, of good alliteration, of creating dynamic quality. The language has, in its poetic quality, he's trying to open up a vista that you might not have. That is not to say that there aren't a lot of other issues out there, whether it's regarding Shabbat or otherwise. I spent this afternoon studying with a group in Jerusalem, and we were studying about laws of muktzah, what you're allowed to touch and move on Shabbat and under what circumstances. And it's very detailed, right? It's not for everybody. And I think that Heschel's idea of Shabbat can be a more expanded concept, or it can be a much more narrow concept. It doesn't have to only be for a very specific halachic model. And I think that's what Reboot was trying to say when it developed all these programs, that there's something in this that we need as modern people. And one woman who was a writer in England commented about the Reboot series about the Sabbath and about powering down. She said, I power down and I spend time with my kids and I do things with them, and we go to the zoo and we go to the park and we do this and we do that, and I don't feel that I have to be responding all the time to my emails and my tweets and everything else. So people will choose different ways to observe the Sabbath. Heschel himself was very traditional, but the insight can be applied in other ways as well. Friedel?
Okay. It was Heschel's sense of awe that grabbed me when I first read the monograph, Shabbat. His sense of awe is something that we don't even allow ourselves anymore. When we're little kids, we run around and a bee is new to us and a flower is new to us, and we run around and try to capture it in our hands or smell it or chase it or something. And then when we go to school, we're told to line up and not to get out of the line. And so you can't really follow up on what you find interesting. But certainly when we daven every day, we say, Reshit Chachma Yirat Adonai. The beginning of wisdom is awe of God. Awe of God. So if you realize you're living in God's world, the universe being God's creation, your sense of awe begins when you begin the day. And so much of the text, we slip over the awe part and we look at other factors of Heschel that are very beautiful. I think get in touch with your sense of awe, whether you're just looking at something in your room like a beautiful vase, or you're astonished at how your hair worked out today. Just allow that for yourself so that when you daven, you know what you're saying to God when you're praising God.
Thank you. I'm astonished if I have hair. Harold, or Ruth, as it says on your screen.
I find that the stress of time and what the world demands of people with their time and their energies forces many people to short shrift their observance because they look at it from a perspective of their time. And I've been struck in large part because of my personal feelings and also from my discussions with Miriam, who has placed spirituality at the forefront in trying to guide people into their observance of Judaism from a deep personal commitment as opposed to lip service.
Miriam is Rabbi Miriam Margles, his daughter. Thank you. I think it's really important to take moments and to stop. Part of the emphasis on mindfulness is exactly that. Lynn Troster, and then we're going to go on. You have to unmute yourself, Lynn.
I was trying. It is very clear to me that Heschel's ability to communicate his evolving thoughts process from his earlier experiences, joyful experiences as a Hasidic child, from his childhood, that he was marked with the spirituality of Hasidism. And all that basis seems to have been the core essence of his spirituality as he was developing his philosophy and theology. And for there are very few leaders in the Jewish world who can communicate this bonding of spirituality from the Hasidic joyful experiences of Shabbat, plus the thought process to communicate what is in every one of us. And that's why, like what Gail was saying about the Jubus, I almost became one because I was looking for something that what I was missing in the conservative Judaism. And of course, it's Chabad that sort of came about and filled that gap for me. So maybe there's something for you, Baruch, to reconcile for all of us.
I think, again, we're all dealing with these kinds of polarities that are pulling at us and pushing at us, and we're trying to go back and forth. I don't know if we ever, as Adi said, where do you get the harmony, the balance? I don't know if there ever is a moment like that. Maybe there are a few moments, actually, but they don't come so often. We're going to go to take a look at something in terms of Heschel's personal background, and then we're going to use that as a stepping stone, really, into a little bit of his theology and his his role as a public intellectual. So we're going to go, again, we're going to share screen. I'm going to get there. And okay. So in his book, A Passion for Truth, which is about the Kotzker Rebbe, he talks about how he's attracted to both the Kotzker Rebbe, and he'll explain a little bit about him, and the Baal Shem Tov, and how each of them played a role in his thinking. And again, look for the polarity. I'm born in Warsaw, but my cradle was in Mezbish, where the Baal Shem Tov lived for the last 20 years of his life. That's where my father came from, and he continued to regard it as his home. He came to Poland, but he always thought of Mezbish. And Heschel says, look, I was named after my grandfather, Avraham Yehoshua Heschel, who was the last great Rebbe in Mezbish. It was as if the Baal Shem Tov had come to life in him. And he was buried next to the Baal Shem Tov. The Opter Rav actually did believe that he had gone through Gilgul Nefesh, incarnations, and on some level, he had also inhabited the body of the Baal Shem Tov. So that little town was near to him. And I'd hear stories or parables about the Baal Shem Tov. Now, I want to interrupt to say that Heschel's perspective on the Baal Shem Tov And the way most people understood the Baal Shem Tov is a bit of hagiography. It's a bit of fable. One of the great things that have occurred in the last 25 years is that my high school locker partner, Moshe Rossman, actually went to Mezbij, found documents in Mezbij, in the court records and et cetera, that shows that the Baal Shem Tov was not such a simple man, that he was called the doctor, that the Hasidism that he actually tried to articulate was more in the synagogue and in the study hall, but that his disciple, Dov Ber of Mezrich, is the one who actually created the movement of Hasidism. So it's important to keep that in mind historically, but the mythology of the Baal Shem Tov as the exemplar of chesed, of kindness, of devotion, of spirituality, that still has a tremendous hold on people. Heschel then goes on to say something else. It was when I was 9 years old, I came to understand a little bit about Menachem Mendel of Kotsk. And since then, he's been a haunting challenge. He's the one who pushes, demands honesty and integrity, confrontation.
Oh. Hello? Are you home? Yes. Good.
Somebody's on the phone. You just have to mute yourself, please.
Just finished.
The Kotzker Rebbe, it was said, couldn't bear living with others and with the world. His last 20 years, he locked himself in his room. He only received his food sort of under the door. The Kotzker Rebbe was the kind of person who stood for emet, for truth. And then Heschel writes, years later, I realized that by being guided by both of them, they were struggling within me. Who was going to be my guide? I found my soul at home with the Baal Shem Tov, but I was driven by the Kotzker. You can have the joy of Mezbij, but the anxiety of Kotsk. Awe and consternation. Keep in mind consternation, fervor and horror, mercy, thinking of mercy, but always being aware of Auschwitz. My heart was in Mezbij, my mind in Kotsk. And now I want to go to another screen share. I've got to get this. Where'd it go? Sorry, I have to go back to this. Wait. Yes. Okay. I'm going to stop sharing the screen. I can't see where it is. Ah, here it is. Okay. In here, he talks about his involvement in the peace movement. Can everybody see this page? Okay.
Yes.
He says, I used to think that the most important realm was privacy. After all, I'm a scholar, I think this way, and 3 events changed my attitude. One was the constant onslaughts on my inner life. That is, people were always asking him, They were approaching him. They wanted his guidance. He couldn't only live in his study. The second was that indifference is worse than evil. And you heard this come up, by the way, in Elie Wiesel, who would also say the same thing. And the third was his study of the prophets. And from them, I learned that we don't really always understand who we are morally. We don't recognize our own failures. And then it became clear to me, morally, there's no limit to the concern we must feel for human beings. And that is a way both of feeling what the Baal Shem Tov is feeling, and then speaking with anger like the Kotzker Rebbe. So he says philosophy had become isolated, self-subsisting, self-indulgent, a ding an sich, a thing in itself. And the answers were unrelated to the problems of real people. That is a whole critique of contemporary philosophy, later articulated in a slightly different way by the author of by Alistair McIntyre, Against Virtue. Sorry, it just takes me a while to get it. And for Heschel, he said, I needed something that would go beyond the academic, and that would talk about the roots of human responsibility. And it was the realization that the common discourse didn't allow for that led me to the prophets. And if the primary experience is a sympathy with the divine pathos, the prophet who hears God's voice and feels his heart, then I was led out of that to see that righteousness is not just a value, it's God's stake in history. And justice is not just a convention, but a demand. Always asking, always pushing. So God's concern for justice grows out of compassion. That's both the Baal Shem Tov and the Kotzker. So that when Cain murders his brother, the words don't say you've broken the law, you've acted improperly, as we would say today. Instead, and the Lord said, what have you done? The voice of your brother's blood cries out to me from the ground. So Heschel is trying to say that out of the personal, he came to think much more about the public. And out of the prophets, he came to talk more on a public level. I want to stop for a moment and just say that there's another polarity that we're not focusing on. I'm going to skip it, although I sent you some stuff about it, and that is Torah from heaven, the Torah min hashamayim b'spiklaria shel adorot, where he shows that there is a polarity between the thinking of Rabbi Akiva and the thinking of Rabbi Yishmael. We're not going to talk about that. But I want to bring to you this sense that that a great thinker doesn't just think. something is moving him inside that compels him to some of his ideas. Already in the 40s, the 30s and 40s, Heschel writes about Maimonides and how he's pushed by the events of his time. He writes about Saadia Gaon. He's pushed by the events of his time. He writes about Yitzchak Abravanel. He's pushed by the events of his time. And I think Heschel at some point says, you know, so am I. I want to pause, take a response, and then I want to go further. Any comments or any questions?
Rabbi, about the comments about concern for other human beings, I often wonder.
This is Elliot speaking.
Yes, I wonder about such things as mindfulness, empathy, and support. We can study the biblical characters and their behaviors, but I wonder in the Torah, what sort of lexicon is there for human feelings, not just behavior and empathy and support and relating lovingly to others? I just wonder about the feelings aspect.
So that's a really good question. It would require a whole course on careful reading of biblical texts, because a lot of people will show that in the terse language of the Bible, you will often have a lot of human issues that come to the fore. The Bible, particularly the Torah, writes in a very terse manner. But you do have texts that indeed show about caring and empathy. Just think, for example, of the bad response of the friends of Job. Think of the kindness that Ruth shows to her mother-in-law and that Boaz shows to Ruth and to Naomi. So it is there, but it needs to be parsed out.
Rabbi, can I make just one more quick comment? It strikes
quickly,
me
though,
that on Yom Kippur, when we get down to the Al-Chais, if you look at maybe there are 40 or so of them, a lot of them deal with what comes out of a person's mouth, what one person says. So I think how you relate to each other verbally can make a difference. And it's so easy to hurt somebody else's feelings, maybe inadvertently. But I think when we talk about mindfulness, is there not a need to slow down our behavior and think of the impact what we say might have on somebody else?
Absolutely. Absolutely. Sheila.
I just would like to know where we could get that last piece that you read out. How could we find it? Could the title? I'd like to read it in its entirety.
I thought I sent a link to it. You can't get more than that unless you buy the book. It's in the introduction to Passion for Truth. But it's part of a this quote is part of something that Dror Bondi, B-O-N-D-I, did at the Drisha Institute in New York. So if you type in Heschel, Bondi, B-O-N-D-I, and Drisha, you'll get something.
How would I spell Drisha? Drisha, D-R-I-S-H-A?
Yes. Okay. Bondi has done a lot of work to reclaim some fragments of Heschel and put them together finally so that we have the full text of the book Torah Min HaShamayim. That was, people were looking for that for a long time. So he did a lot of great work to recover it. If you type in Dror Bondi lecture, Heschel, you'll get some very good lectures.
Thank you.
Jerry Grammer, very quickly.
In response to what you said about feeling Give you examples, Joseph and his brothers. When Joseph and his brother, he cried. And that's not something that's terse. That shows a depth of feeling that may be rare in the Torah, but it's there.
Absolutely. Absolutely. It's another good example of that. Okay, I'm going to share screens and I'm going to go quickly through some important areas. Heschel was invited to, in 1968, I think, to go across the street from the Jewish Theological Seminary, kitty corner, to Union Theological Seminary. He was the first Jew ever invited to teach at Union. And this is the introductory lecture. And you all have it on a link. But notice how he begins. He begins not apologetically. This is who I am. I come from Abraham. My rabbi is Moses. I was able to leave Warsaw. I am a brand plucked from the fire. I speak as someone who's afraid that God has turned away from us. I speak as a person who is convinced that the fate of the Jewish people and the fate of the Bible are intertwined. I'm going to take you all the way to the end of this because it's a very rich document, but it will take a long time to get to, and we're not going to do it all. At the very end, he says, what's the purpose of interreligious cooperation? It's not to flatter. And it's not to refute. But it actually is to help, to share insight, to cooperate on a scholarly level, and to search in the wilderness for well springs of devotion, for treasures of stillness, for the power of love and care for man. We need the courage to believe that the word of God endures forever, as well as here and now. So what he's trying to do is he's saying that there is, in interreligious dialogue and cooperation, the possibility of learning from each other and of inspiring each other. Christer Stendhal, I'm going to end this and come back again to us. Christer Stendhal taught at Harvard Div for a number of years. He was the Archbishop of the Swedish Lutheran Church. And Stendhal said that when you do interfaith dialogue, first of all, always use the best examples. Don't use the people who are bad examples of another tradition. Secondly, let the other tradition speak for itself. Don't say what they believe. And third, he said, carry a little bit of holy envy. Think about what in this other tradition you really admire. You can even say, I wish we had it in ours. It's out of those three things you really can develop the kind of relationship that matters and that will make a difference. I want to take you to, let's see if I can get this. Yes. Okay. Come back to Zoom, share screen. I want to talk about sacred aging. He spoke to the White House Conference on Aging in 1962. And what he had to say about aging was very important. He said we have an idolatry of youth. We have contempt for the old, and we have a fear of getting old. Now, since then, perhaps even more, we've become much more of a youth-driven culture. But he says old age is a challenge to inner life. It takes wisdom and strength not to succumb. We are not only a burden or a liability or drain on resources, because relationships, it's not only efficiency. And people feel that they have outlived their usefulness. So he's trying to analyze the problem. And then he says, the goal is not to keep the old man busy, but to remind him that every moment is an opportunity for greatness. The days of our youth is when we prepare for aging. The shock or the tragedy is that old age seems to come upon us suddenly, like we're not prepared, because we define life in terms of function and activity. You can hear the echo of the Sabbath in his comments about aging. And therefore, you have to build your life as if it were a work of art. You have to try to find a way to understand that you are going to somehow, you need to put it together in a way that even as you age, you have something for yourself and something to give to others. Zalman Schechter's last work, last years, was really about what he called moving from aging to saging. How does one share one's wisdom? And will there be people who will listen? I don't know about you, I often regret that I didn't ask certain questions as my mother or father aged. Not that relationships were always good, but I would have liked to have known more. And a whole bunch of things like that. I want to take you to another issue, only because of time. I'm really not that. Oh, I'm not taking you too much to Vietnam or civil rights. We had a little bit of that, but I do want you to watch this, where Rabbi Splansky and I and Greg Beals were in a dialogue with the director of the film that we saw in the first session. Can you see it?
Nope.
No. Probably because I haven't put it in share screen yet. That's probably why.
Yeah.
Okay, and now there's something so that you will be able to hear it.
When you share the screen, there's a checkbox where you can press share audio. So if you stop sharing the screen and then share it again, there's a checkbox.
Share screen, advanced. No, I have to hit share screen. There, optimized for video clip. Got it. Thank you.
I think there may be another one for share audio.
Of seeing people on the streets begging for food. He also retained a memory from Easter.
That's a lot of responsibility that we have.
You take you back a little bit. Being amazed, he used to say, and
I didn't know that. That's
great. I'm trying to get emotion. Rabbi Splansky.
As full partners as best they could, and moved, advanced society, and here we are still. It's just absolute heartbreak. My grandfather also joined Heschel on Kennedy's special counsel. There was a president who was serious about fighting racism in America, and to see what is institutionalized now is just terrifying. So I just want to name that. I would be so curious to hear what Heschel would teach today about Israel. His loyalty to the Jewish people was complete, and his devotion to humanity was also complete. And so I do wonder what he would say about how to advance the Palestinian people while still celebrating the return of the Jewish people to the land of Israel. And then finally, I would be so curious what he might say about the environment and what we are doing to our planet. I feel confident that he would have made that a core issue for addressing us if he had lived long enough to see the disaster that is ours to grapple with today.
I guess if what Rabbi Friedman-Cole said earlier about one of the paths to God being through the experience of nature as being so central for Heschel, then that does make a lot of sense. Martin, what do you think Heschel would call on us today to?
Well, I think Abraham Joshua Heschel will be very busy today. There would be a lot of people, I hope, a lot of people who would be calling upon him to offer wisdom and sort of a moral direction. In some ways, we're back in the 60s again. I mean, people are on the streets. African Americans are rightfully saying, what's happened here? We're taking steps backwards. We're in the midst of a nuclear escalation again. I mean, the tensions between the United States and Russia are right back up where they were. The disparity between rich and poor again. So in some ways, we never left the 60s. One of the areas, though, I want to say that we can list all the areas that he would be speaking about, but I think one of the true areas of progress, and it's part because of Nostra Aetate, his work with the Catholic Church, as I think there's been really wonderful improvement in the way the faith traditions now collectively come together around issues, feel a comfort and a confidence that together they can sort of overcome theological distinctions, and yet at the same time work to make this a better planet, make this a better world. And I think he'd be thrilled about that. That was one of the things that he lived and died for. He really wanted to see the faiths come together, that no religion is an island. And so I think he'd be pleased about that. And it's true. I mean, I mentioned to you in our sort of a pre-conversation that I'm now embarking on a new film, a special 2-hour film for PBS on Sabbath. And the whole notion of creation, I would just like to echo that I think he would be out there talking about the planet. This was not something, he talked about, Sabbath and creation from a theological point of view. It's only in the last generation or two that all the accumulated data has come in for us to understand how much damage has been going on for so long and the perils that we're actually facing right now. I think he'd be ringing the alarm about the concern for the world, the environment that we all commonly share, and do it from a theological perspective. And that, I think, is really important.
Martin, I really appreciate you reminding us that so much progress has been made. And I guess at the end of the day, Heschel would tell us to be optimists, even against our better judgment. And obviously, the way forward is through hope. Rabbi Friedman-Cole, perhaps we'll end with you. When we spoke earlier last week, you had mentioned you have an enduring last memory of Rabbi Heschel, and I wondered if you would share that with us.
The week before my teacher died, we were together in New York at the Aufruf before the wedding of Byron Sherwin. It was a blistering cold day, and I walked Rabbi and Mrs. Heschel back to their apartment on Riverside, and I remember walking in front of him, opening my coat to block the wind. And then because Josette had made plane reservations and I was going to pick him up in Chicago, I remember a call from my friend, Rabbi Howard Addison, saying that Rabbi Heschel had died on Shabbat and he wouldn't be at the airport for me to pick him up.
Rabbi Heschel left us with a tremendous, tremendous legacy, and it's been an incredible pleasure for me and very, very enlightening to be able to.
So there's much more. I'm going to put on, for those of you who want to stay, a 10-minute film clip called I Felt As If My Legs Were Praying. which takes some of the images that you've seen in the first film, but carries others as well, because I'm conscious of the time. But I want to give people a chance. It's very important. If you have a question or a comment before that film, but you have to keep it really terse. Judy, and thank you for being the co-host.
My pleasure. Very quick.
I want to just say before Judy speaks, she's in Florida. She's missed the wonderful snow we had today.
I've been getting texts all day long about the snow. There's so much that we didn't do, and there's so much in the readings that we didn't get to. I'm going to put you on the spot. How would you feel about doing another 4 sessions, a Heschel 2.0? I wonder if a lot of people other than me would be interested.
It's possible. I'm scheduled to teach another 4-session course in the spring. We haven't decided on a topic. And we'll send a survey out to people who were in this course for you to evaluate the course. Please don't evaluate my technology. And we'll have some possible topics for the spring, and you can tell me, what you would like. It'll be anonymous so that I won't see individual comments and connect them to individual people. But we will send that out. Jerry.
Yeah, as far as your technology
His daughter is a wonderful rabbi, I want to just add.
As far as your technology is concerned, all I would say is it's bound to improve.
Thank you. Okay, I'm going to put up this this video, and let me just go back to screen sharing. If you don't want to watch it, you don't have to, but this is going to be it. So thank you very much for this. Oh, I'm going to do 2. I'm going to do a 2-minute one and a 9-minute one, because the 2-minute one is so beautiful. Wait, I had the wrong one front and center. No, I'm going to save that maybe in case there's another course. I don't know. But let's do this, and I'm going to go back and I'm going to do the screen share, and this is what we're going to see.
This weekend of Martin Luther King Jr.'s birthday, religious services are planned around the country to remember him and his legacy. Some of them will be in synagogues that are honoring both King and the late Abraham Joshua Heschel, one of King's many courageous supporters. Heschel is widely considered to be one of the greatest American religious figures of the last century, a rabbi, theologian, social activist, and mystic, admired by Christians as well as Jews. He would have been 101 years old this month. Our segment was produced by Steve Brand, a New York filmmaker who is completing a documentary on Heschel called Praying with My Legs. Brand gathered powerful recollections from those who had known him and who wish his prophetic voice were still sounding.
Pick 'em up and lay 'em down right.
It was his participation in the civil rights movement that first made Heschel widely known. In a famous photo of the Selma March in 1965, its leaders wearing garlands, Heschel was the white man with the prophet's beard, 2 to the right of Dr. King. That was the occasion on which Heschel said he felt he was praying with his legs.
God is either the father of all men or of no men. And the idea of judging a person in terms of black or brown or white is an eye disease.
Heschel also publicly and passionately opposed the war in Vietnam.
How can I pray when I have in my conscience the awareness that I am co-responsible for the death of innocent people in Vietnam. In a free society, some are guilty, all are responsible.
The war in Vietnam for Heschel was an ultimate act of dehumanization, to no longer even see that there was an enemy on the other side who was a human being. And Heschel was convinced that if I act with a disregard for the humanity of my fellow human being, I am really ultimately attacking God.
Heschel's daughter, Susanna, teaches Jewish studies at Dartmouth College.
My father was sleepless over Vietnam. He would be up late at night, 1, 2, 3 in the morning, couldn't sleep. He was so upset. It was on his mind all the time.
Heschel's experience of the Holocaust was one reason for his social activism. He had seen close up what racism and apathy can do, and how violence toward human beings often begins with the abuse of language.
Hitler, he said, did not come to power with tanks and machine guns. Hitler came to power with words.
Heschel was raised in Warsaw and did graduate study in Berlin. Just 6 weeks before World War II, he was able to escape from Europe. Heschel's late wife, Sylvia, remembered.
There were sisters of his who were killed. That was a very painful thing for him, very. His mother died of a heart attack as soon as the Nazi came to the door. She just fell to the ground. It was awful.
But Heschel never blamed God.
He said God didn't do it, man did it.
Heschel's biographer is Edward Kaplan.
There are moments in which he talks about overcoming despair and overcoming gloom. But the response to the catastrophe is not to focus on the catastrophe, but to focus on human possibilities.
When you ask Heschel, where was God during the Holocaust? His answer was always, of course, where was man? But if you read Heschel carefully, I would say God cares. God weeps with man at his sufferings. God participates in human suffering. And therefore, God was there in the Holocaust.
Whenever I get a little down or depressed, I go get one of his books and I read the prophet Isaiah and what he has to say about Isaiah. Because Isaiah was written at a time of the desolation of Israel. And yet it's the loftiest vision of dreams for humankind. It's people's ability to have faith in the midst of persecution and destruction.
At the Jewish Theological Seminary in New York, Heschel was a professor of social ethics and mysticism, two powerful strands of Jewish thought. From the prophets, he learned to speak out about the world's evils. From his ancestors, who were Hasidic Jews, known for their ecstatic spirituality, he learned to celebrate life.
I say that this world in itself is so fantastically mysterious, so challengingly marvelous, that not to realize that there is more than I see, that there's endlessly more than I can express or even conceive in just being underdeveloped intellectually.
One of Heschel's main attempts in getting to you, in a sense, is his own sense of radical amazement. To be aware of so many different things. Did you notice the trees? Well, Heschel was in love with trees. You're walking at Riverside Park. Don't forget the trees, you know. Don't forget the river. You have to react.
Heschel described the spiritual power he felt as the ineffable.
Oh, ineffable. He loved that word. That which is inexplainable, but you know is there. It points to something beyond that which we pray to, meaning God.
Heschel's biographer notes his use of dramatic language to try to reach others' hearts, not just their minds. He read a Heschel description of a mystical experience.
A moment comes like a thunderbolt, in which a flash of the undisclosed rends our dark apathy asunder. The ineffable has shuddered itself into the soul. It has entered our consciousness like a ray of light passing into a lake. I can't believe that someone could write a passage like this without having experienced it himself.
Heschel's deep spirituality drew many Christians to him, among them the Catholic priest and anti-Vietnam War activist Daniel Berrigan, who became a friend.
I was seeing someone who was immersed totally in his own religious tradition and was at the same time charmingly ecumenical, and open to others. I began to understand that the two went together, that if you were a person of deep faith, you were open to others. And you didn't draw lines or boundaries or say, we're inside the circle and others are out. He was one of the chosen who believed that everyone was chosen, and that the very fact of existing in the world meant you were chosen.
Heschel fought all anti-Semitism. He campaigned for the rights of Jews in the Soviet Union, and at the Second Vatican Council in the 1960s, he lobbied hard against church teachings that demeaned Jews or anticipated their conversion.
I came out with a very strong rebuke. I'd say I'd rather go to Auschwitz and give up my religion. And that my being Jewish is so sacred to me that I'm ready to die for it.
Over his lifetime, Heschel published 18 books and more than 100 essays. He was driven to show the relevance of Jewish scripture to modern life. In the Sabbath, he saw time as something to be made holy. In Man is Not Alone and other volumes, he said God expects and depends on human beings to carry out his will.
So Heschel can say to the world, you know, the challenge today is nihilism. He says the enemy we all face is nihilism. The world is going to hell. The sense of meaninglessness is pervasive, and we have to do something about this.
His friends say Heschel did a lot about it by what he taught, and even more by how he lived.
We are called upon to be an image of God. You see, God is absent, invisible, and the task of a human being is to represent the divine, to be a reminder of the presence of God.
1 year after he said that, Heschel died on December 23, 1972. He was just 65 years old.
For those of you who stayed to watch it, thank you very much. And it's really been wonderful. As I was watching it, I was jotting down ideas of what I would do if there were a second Heschel course. But there are other topics as well. And I want to thank you very much for staying with it. And Elliot, I'm sorry I didn't get to your last question. But I hope that as we get just 2 weeks from now, a little under 2 weeks, to Tu B'Shvat, I hope that will be a harbinger of spring. Remember, Tu B'Shvat occurs 1 month before Purim. That we celebrate a different kind of miracle. And the next month, on the same day of the month, is Pesach. So we go from the beginning of a natural change to miraculous moments. But we also have to take a few moments to look at the natural miracles around us, even in the midst of the snow, for those of us who are up north. Thank you very, very much for joining me. Be well.
Thank you, Rabbi.
Thank you, Rabbi.
Good night, everybody. Thank you.
Thank you, Rabbi.
Good night. Thank you.
Laila Tov, Rabbi.
Laila Tov, Erev Tov.
Laila Tov.
Laila Tov.